I'm trading my sorrows. I'm trading my shame. I'm laying them down for the joy of the Lord. I'm trading my sickness. I'm trading my pain. I'm laying them down for the joy of the Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen.
Hello, Connect Group. Steve has asked us this evening to go back and look at the kind of preamble to the 8 virtues that we've been talking about over the last few weeks that are found in 2 Peter chapter 1. And so I want to begin this evening by reading verses 3 and 4 of 2 Peter 1. His divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of Him who called us to His own glory and excellence, by which He has granted to us His precious and very great promises, so that through them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped from the corruption that is in the world because of sinful desire. Now, what I want to do for a few minutes is just kind of unpack this and get the essence of what Peter is telling us, because I think it will help in the discussion that takes place in a few minutes. Up here on the board, I've broken down what Peter says here into something that I hope you can grab a hold of and hold on to. He begins by telling us that divine power is giving us all that we need in order to show the divine nature. Okay? Now, that divine power has been utilized in 2 ways, he says. First of all, there's a means, and secondly, there's a motivation. Now, Peter said that the means that this divine power is using to help us develop this divine nature is the fact that He has given us everything that pertains to life and godliness. Now, what that means, I think, is that God sent His Son to die for our sins, to purchase us back from sin. He has provided us with His Word. He has given us His Spirit to dwell within us. In other words, Peter's saying there is not a thing that we need to develop the divine nature that has not already been provided for us. We have every tool that's necessary. We have the means to attain the divine nature. And then secondly, he says, He's also provided for us a motivation. His precious and magnificent promises, Peter calls them. Now, what are those precious and magnificent promises? Well, how about, lo, I'm with you always, even to the end of the world, Matthew 28, verse 20. The promise of Matthew chapter 7, ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and him who knocks, it shall be opened. Or that promise in John chapter 14, I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. All the way through the preaching and teaching of Jesus, there are all these special, precious promises that He's given to us. And Peter says, between the means and the motivation, we should attain to the divine nature. Now, what's the divine nature? Well, that's what I want us to think about for a minute, because that's a very special, very precious thing. I would equate the divine nature with the fruit of the Spirit that Paul talks about in Galatians chapter 5, verses 22 and 23. And I think that we have to contrast that with what I'm going to call human nature, or what Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 will call the flesh. Now, the divine nature speaks to the fact that we can reflect God's presence in our lives. And that's why I say that I think this speaks to the fruit of the Spirit. It is because the Spirit dwells in you and dwells in me that we are able to show the love and the joy and the peace and the patience and so on that Paul talks about are a part of the fruit of the Spirit. It is a reflection of the fact that God lives in us. And that stands in contrast to human nature, to the flesh. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul will lament as he writes to the Corinthian brethren in the first 4 verses or so. He's saying, I want to write to you as spiritual people, but I can't do that because you're not spiritual. And the word that he uses there, which is generally translated something like worldly, literally in the Greek is because you're fleshy. In other words, as a Christian, you're still putting the emphasis on human nature instead of upon the divine nature. You're focusing on the flesh instead of the Spirit. Now, let me go a little bit further in talking about this very special divine nature that Peter makes reference to here. And let me illustrate it versus human nature in this way. Let's take 2 birds. Buzzards on the one hand and bluebirds on the other. Now, by nature, what are buzzards drawn to? I hate to say this, but they're drawn to rotting, dying, revolting corpses. Armadillos and possums laying by the side of the road in the heat of the sun with their legs sticking up in the air. And I know that sounds gross, but that's their nature. That's what they're drawn to, okay? On the other hand, you have bluebirds. And bluebirds, they like a tasty grasshopper. They love berries. By nature, that's what bluebirds are drawn to. That's what they like. And I would say that the buzzards and the bluebirds stand kind of as a parallel to the human nature and to divine nature. Human nature is drawn to the things of the flesh. In 1 John chapter 2, John's going to warn, listen, don't be drawn to the things of the world. Don't love the things of the world. Human nature, flesh, is drawn to that which really is spiritually revolting. I hope that there's a lot of the things that you see today on television and in the movies and so on that just kind of revulse you. They're just icky. I can't remember the last time I watched a comedian on television because their stuff's just revolting, okay? I would equate that to, you can set a bluebird beside, a nice rotting armadillo out there on the road, and that bluebird ain't going to touch it because that bluebird is revolted by that. It wants no part of it. That it's not its nature to desire that. On the other hand, the divine nature is going to be drawn to that which is good and pure and just and holy because it's a reflection of the nature of God. It is fruit of the Spirit. It's love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and godliness and self-control. It's these beautiful things that bless our lives and bless the lives of others. Now again, you take a buzzard and you put a buzzard beside a nice pile of berries, and that buzzard is going to go, ugh, I don't want any part of that. The bluebird is going to be drawn to it. And so it is, I believe, as children of God. It's in our nature to be drawn to that which is good and pure and holy and revulsed by that which is not. And that divine nature is no accident. Again, listen to Peter. That divine nature has come about because of divine power. Because God has given us the means and the motivation to have that divine nature. Now, do you develop that divine nature? Yes, to a great degree you do. Because what will Peter go on to say, starting in verse 5? Make every effort to add these virtues to your life. Why? So that you can reflect that divine nature. And so as we discuss this preamble to the 8 virtues this evening, I want you to think about the divine power and the divine nature and how important it is that as children of God, we bless this world and bless each other and honor our God by reflecting the divine nature. God bless.
Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, yes, Lord, amen.